It wasn't a shadow or a double exposure. The thing on the scan was real, and it was holding my patient's hand. My name is Alistair Finch. I've been a radiologist for over 20 years, and in all that time, I've seen it all. Or so I thought. Broken bones, tumors the size of baseballs, birth defects that defied logic. You learn to see the human body as a complex machine. You distance yourself from the person and focus on the image. It's the only way to stay sane. My office on the 3rd floor of St. Mary's Hospital was my sanctuary, a dark, quiet space where I could review scans in peace. The only sound, the soft hum of the servers and the rhythmic click of my mouse. The night in question was a Tuesday, late. I was reviewing a full-body PET scan for a patient named Clara Gable. Standard cancer follow-up. Her chart was unremarkable for a woman her age. A history of colon cancer, now in remission, a recent hip replacement, and some minor heart trouble. I worked methodically, scrolling through the images, my eyes scanning for any sign of metabolic activity that might suggest a new malignancy. The brain looked clear, the lungs were good, the abdominal cavity clean. As I progressed to the full-body overview, I saw something that made me pause. There was a subtle blur, a faint artifact that my years of training told me shouldn't be there. It seemed to be emanating from just behind Mrs. Gable's right shoulder. At first, I dismissed it as a technical glitch, a calibration error in the machine. But my gut instinct, a cold, creeping unease, told me otherwise. I zoomed in, running the image through a dozen different filters. The blur sharpened, resolving into a distinct, ghostly silhouette. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. It was a figure, faint, transparent, like an echo of a person. It was skeletal, elongated, its rib cage and spine a pale, shimmering suggestion of bone, and its hand. Its hand was intertwined with Mrs. Gable's. I froze, the mouse still in my grip. A profound chill swept through my small office, a sensation far deeper than the air conditioning. The rational part of my brain, the part trained by medical school and 2 decades of practice, scrambled for an explanation. A double exposure. Impossible. The machine's software would flag it. An internal reflection. The physics didn't add up. A hoax. The technician, a young man named Mark, had been working here for years. He was meticulous. I kept staring at the image, zooming in and out, trying to find a flaw, any detail that would break the illusion. But the more I looked, the more real it became. The figure wasn't just near Mrs. Gable. It was with her. The position of its hand, the way its transparent fingers were wrapped around hers, it was an act of possession. It looked like it was leading her somewhere. A new, more terrifying thought dawned on me. What if this wasn't an anomaly? What if this was what was always there, just invisible to the naked eye? What if I was the only one who had ever been in a position to see it? My hands were shaking as I pulled up Mrs. Gable's personal information. Room 407. I had to warn someone, but what would I say? Hey, I think there's a ghost on your patient's CT scan. They'd have me committed. Still, I couldn't just sit there. I had to see her. I had to know if she was okay. I closed the file, my office feeling suddenly suffocating. As I walked down the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls, the hospital's familiar sounds, the whir of a ventilator, the distant, muffled laughter of nurses at the station did nothing to calm me. Every shadow seemed deeper, every corner a potential hiding place. The cold I had felt in my office followed me like a shroud. I reached the 4th floor and saw her room, 407, at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, a crack of light spilling out. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure the whole floor could hear it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorframe. What was I expecting to see? I pushed the door open just a few inches and peered inside. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of a small lamp on the bedside table. Mrs. Gable was in bed, her frail body a slight mound beneath the blankets. A nurse was standing by the bed, her back to me, writing something on a chart. Relief, sharp and sudden, flooded through me. She was fine, I was just being paranoid. The scan was a fluke, a glitch, a mistake. I was about to turn away when I saw it. Mrs. Gable's right hand, the one from the scan, was dangling over the side of the bed. It was held in an impossible position, palm facing up, her fingers slightly curled, as if a living, unseen hand was clasped in hers. The nurse, oblivious, adjusted the blankets. As she did, she accidentally jostled Mrs. Gable's arm. Her hand did not move. It stayed in that same frozen, unnatural position. The nurse gave a slight, confused frown, then shrugged and went back to her chart. Just then, a wave of cold air hit me, a blast so sharp and sudden it made me gasp. The lamp on the table flickered violently, and from the bed, a soft, final sigh. The nurse dropped her clipboard and fumbled for the call button. The heart monitor began to wail, a single, agonizing tone. I didn't need to be a doctor to know what had happened. I didn't need to see the nurse's frantic movements or hear the other doctors rushing in. The thing I had seen on the scan was not a ghost waiting in the afterlife. It was a guide, standing by, waiting for its turn. I never mentioned the scan to anyone. I took a new job at a different hospital, thousands of miles away. But to this day, I can't shake the memory of that skeletal hand, forever intertwined with my patients. And every time a new elderly patient comes in for a scan, a part of me dreads what I might see and who might be standing just behind them. The cold in the morgue wasn't the kind you feel. It was the kind that settles in your bones and whispers that you are not alone. And the corpse on the table wasn't dead, not entirely. Working the graveyard shift at the city morgue was, for the most part, mind-numbingly routine. I'm an attendant, not a doctor. My job is to log new arrivals, prepare them for a pathologist, and file the paperwork. It's a quiet life. The hum of the refrigeration units, the scent of antiseptic and cold steel, the low buzz of the fluorescent lights, those were my constant companions. It was a sterile, predictable world. The night started like any other. The ambulance brought in a new body around 2 a.m. DOA from a heart attack at home. The paperwork identified him as Arthur Vance, 78. No family, no next of kin listed, just another nameless end to a forgotten life. I wheeled the gurney into the preparation room. The body was draped in a thin, white sheet. I pulled it back to perform the initial checks and felt a familiar, detached pity. Arthur Vance was a gaunt man, his skin a pale, waxy yellow. His mouth was slightly open, as if in a silent scream, and his eyes were open. This was wrong, very wrong. I've handled hundreds of bodies, and standard procedure is to close the eyes. The ambulance crew had been sloppy. Annoyed, I reached for a small piece of gauze to hold the lids closed, a common practice before the body goes to refrigeration. As my fingers hovered over his face, I noticed something else was off. His pupils were slightly dilated, but they weren't staring blankly at the ceiling. They were fixed. They were looking at me. A shard of ice formed in my gut. I told myself it was post-mortem muscle contraction. The eyes sometimes drift open after death, but they don't focus. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping unease. The cold was getting to me. I reached out again, a little more hesitantly this time. Just as my thumb touched his eyelid, a flicker, a minute, almost imperceptible twitch of his lower lip. My hand recoiled, as if from a hot flame. My heart, a moment ago a slow, steady drum, was now a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My mind raced through every medical explanation I knew, every physiological anomaly. Post-mortem spasms, rigor mortis setting in. I was tired. My brain was playing tricks on me in the cold, oppressive silence of the morgue. It had to be. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain my composure. The body lay still, perfectly still, just as it should be. The eyes were still open, but they were the vacant, lifeless orbs they should have been all along. I was imagining things. I picked up the clipboard and tried to focus on the paperwork, but my peripheral vision kept snagging on the corpse. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. My own breathing was loud in my ears. I forced myself to get back to work. I needed to document the body. As I leaned over to check the tag on his toe, my hand brushed against his arm. It was cold, of course, but there was a subtle tension, a rigidity that felt wrong, a muscle twitching just under the skin. I pulled back, my heart now a deafening drumbeat. I looked at his face again. The lips, slightly parted, were trembling. Not a muscle spasm, it was a conscious effort. He was trying to form a word. Help, a thin, rasping whisper, barely audible over the hum of the fridge. He's here. I stumbled backward, knocking a metal tray to the floor. It clattered loudly, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. The corpse's mouth fell slack, and the eyes, still fixed on me, were now filled with a desperate, silent terror. Panic seized me. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet felt rooted to the cold tile floor. Arthur Vance's hands, which had been resting peacefully on his chest, now began to move. His fingers, stiff and pale, slowly, painstakingly, curled into a fist. Then, with a shudder that rocked his entire body, the index finger began to point. Not at me. His finger was pointing to the large, reflective surface of the stainless steel examination table. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the corpse's hand. I looked from his frantic gaze to the reflection, my blood turning to ice. The reflection was distorted, but clear enough. I saw myself, a pale figure, my face twisted in terror. But behind me, a deep, featureless shadow was reaching for my shoulder. It was dark and formless, a void of nothingness that absorbed the light. I wasn't alone in the morgue. The old man wasn't trying to speak. He was trying to warn me. He hadn't died of a heart attack. He had died of whatever this thing was. And now, it was my turn. The lights in the room flickered, and the hum of the refrigeration units died. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the cold, spectral fingers of the shadow on my shoulder. And in the darkness, a voice, not a whisper, but a thought pressed into my mind, as cold as the slab I was standing on. You're next.
The chill wasn't just from the late hour. It was a bone-deep dread that settled the moment I read the words. They were meant for me, a warning whispered from the edge of death. My first night on the geriatric ward's graveyard shift at St. Jude's Hospital in Pavia was supposed to be quiet. Most patients were asleep, their breathing a soft, rhythmic hum against the sterile silence. I just brewed a cup of weak instant coffee when Nurse Evelyn, her face etched with years of night duty, gave me a brief rundown. Room 312, Mr. Abernathy was fading. "Just keep him comfortable, dear," she'd said, her voice low and tired. "His family said any time now." I made my rounds, the fluorescent lights casting long, eerie shadows down the empty corridors. When I reached room 312, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. Mr. Abernathy was frail, his skin papery and translucent against the white sheets. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and ragged. I checked his pulse, weak but present, just as Evelyn had said. I settled into the chair beside his bed, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and Mr. Abernathy's labored breaths. Time seemed to slow down, each tick of the wall clock amplifying the stillness. An hour passed, maybe two. I was starting to feel the familiar drowsiness of the late shift when Mr. Abernathy stirred. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with surprising clarity. They were ancient eyes, filled with a profound sadness and something else. Fear. He tried to speak, his lips moving silently. I leaned closer. "Water?" I whispered. He shook his head weakly, his gaze fixed on mine. He then lifted a trembling hand, gesturing towards the bedside table. There was a notepad and a pen. I placed them within his reach, my brow furrowed with concern. With agonizing slowness, his frail fingers gripped the pen. He struggled, his breath coming in short gasps. I wanted to help, but something in his intense stare held me back. It was as if he had to do this himself. Finally, with a last surge of effort, he began to write. The pen scratched faintly against the paper, the sound loud in the quiet room. It took what felt like an eternity, his hand shaking violently as he formed each letter. When he was done, he dropped the pen, his hand falling limply back onto the bed. His eyes remained locked on mine, a silent plea in their depths. Then his gaze glazed over, his chest stilled, and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor flatlined into a continuous, mournful tone. I felt a wave of sadness, the quiet passing of a life. It was a common occurrence in a hospital, yet this felt different. There was an unsettling weight in the air, a palpable sense of something unfinished. Hesitantly, I reached for the notepad. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the scrawled words, barely legible in his shaky handwriting. Not her. "It watches by the window when the moon is full. Don't let it see you. It takes the breath. You're next." My blood ran cold. I looked towards the window, the curtains drawn against the night. The moon was indeed full, a pale disk hanging in the inky sky. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, and I jumped. Dismissing it as the ramblings of a dying man, I tried to rationalize it. Fear and confusion in his final moments. But the intensity in his eyes as he had looked at me, the desperate urgency in his movements, it felt too real. I called the nurse's station, my voice trembling slightly as I reported Mr. Abernathy's passing. Evelyn arrived, her expression somber. I didn't mention the note. I felt foolish, a new nurse spooked by a dying patient's last words. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the image of those frantic, shaky letters. Every creak of the old building, every shadow in the periphery, seemed to hold a sinister meaning. I found myself constantly glancing at the window, half expecting to see someone watching. The next few nights were a blur of anxiety. I kept the curtains in room 312 tightly drawn, even though the room was now empty, awaiting cleaning. I avoided looking out the windows on my rounds, my heart hammering whenever I had to walk past one. One particularly still night, the full moon hanging high and bright, I was making my rounds. As I passed the now clean room 312, I felt an inexplicable pull. Against my better judgment, I paused. The curtains were slightly parted, just a sliver of moonlight illuminating the empty bed. A cold dread washed over me, colder than any hospital air conditioning. I could have sworn I felt a presence, a heavy, unseen weight just beyond the glass. My breath hitched in my throat. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound came from the direction of the window. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but in the absolute silence of the ward, it was chillingly distinct. My blood turned to ice. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Then the scratching stopped. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Slowly, hesitantly, I backed away from the door, my eyes fixed on the sliver of moonlight. I never looked directly at the window that night. I finished my shift in a state of heightened paranoia, every shadow a potential threat. I told myself it was my imagination, stress, the lingering effect of a dying man's last words. But to this day, whenever the moon is full, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still, I think I can still hear that faint, chilling scratching at the window. Mr. Abernathy's last words weren't just a message. They were a curse, a terrifying warning that I might have already ignored for too long.